Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Noah Rauch. I'm the Senior Vice President for Education and Public Programs here at the Memorial and the Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program. As always, I want to extend a warm welcome to our museum members and to those tuning in to our live web broadcast. This is our last program of 2025. And before I start introducing the program, I do want to take a moment just to shout out the staff who make programs like this possible. I see a lot of familiar faces, and you come back because of the work of this team. And so please join me in just thanking Dahlia and Geraldine and Ella and Tom and Henry and Victoria, Jose and Kelman. It takes a lot to put these programs together. They always run incredibly well. And I'm very fortunate to work with such a wonderful team. So tonight's program will explore an extraordinary story of survival. To give you a sense of how extraordinary, on 9/11, when the Twin Towers collapsed, approximately 2,600 people were killed immediately at the World Trade Center. This included 441 first responders and roughly 2,100 civilians. The force of those collapses was overwhelming. 110 stories, each an acre in size, falling a quarter of a mile. If you were inside the buildings when they fell, there was a little chance of survival, but there wasn't a 0% chance. Tonight, we are joined by PAPD Officer Will Jimeno, one of the 18 people, just 18, who survived the collapse, and two individuals, NYPD Emergency Service ESU officers, Paddy McGee and Scott Strauss, who heroically fought to save him and his PAPD partner, Sergeant John McLaughlin, deep in the debris pile in the afternoon and evening hours of September 11th. Will Jimeno is a Navy veteran, retired Port Authority police detective, and the author of two books, Sunrise Through the Darkness, a survivor's account of learning to live again beyond 9/11, an immigrant American survivor, a little boy who grew up to be all three. He was awarded the PAPD Medal of Honor for his bravery during the 9/11 attacks. Paddy McGee Sr. is a retired NYPD ESU detective. He joined the NYPD in 1984 and later joined ESU Squad 1 in Lower Manhattan. He's currently an executive security specialist for IBM, and he was awarded the NYPD Medal of Honor for his rescue efforts on 9/11. Scott Strauss is a retired NYPD ESU detective, former four-time mayor of Mineola, and currently the Nassau County legislator for the 9th District on Long Island. This is a running theme, but he was also awarded the NYPD Medal of Honor for his rescue efforts on 9/11. I want to thank you all for your years of service and for your generosity to this institution over the years. In addition to tonight's program, Scott, Will, and Paddy all have participated in our signature educational program, our anniversary digital learning experience, in 2018, 2021, and 2023, respectively. That program has reached over 5 million students around the world, and it's stories like theirs that continue to connect the next generation to what happened here. So I want to thank you for that generosity. Thank you for joining us. And please join me in welcoming Will, Paddy, and Scott in conversation with Museum President and CEO, Beth Hillman.
Thank you, Noah, and thank you all for joining us. I'm humbled to have a chance to share the stage with these gentlemen and for you to hear firsthand one of the most extraordinary stories of 9/11. They'd be the first to tell you there are lots of different stories to be told, and there are lots of people who would act comparably in their shoes. But I have to tell you, if you haven't had a chance to actually hear them speak about this, or if you haven't seen the film or the print versions of what they have to say, you're in for a tremendous treat. I also want to thank everybody who braved the traffic to get here tonight, or everyone who's listening in from your warm and dry homes, able to join us on this night in the holiday season in New York City. So we're going to start with Will to talk about, set the stage for that day, about where he was and what happened on September 11th, 2001.
Well, September 2001 was a normal day for me, with the exception that I really was living the American dream. I had just bought my first home with my wife, Allison, 6 weeks prior to the attack in Clifton, New Jersey. Woke up to the job that I dreamed about since being a child. Went into my bedroom, kissed Allison goodbye like I did every day. I was working day tour 7 to 3, and kissed her belly because she was 7 months pregnant on September 11th. Went into the next room and kissed my little girl, Bianca, who was 4 years old. And I literally skipped down the stairs and got in my truck, came through the Lincoln Tunnel, came to the bus terminal where I was assigned right after the academy. I had only been on the street 9 months. We graduated January 19th of 2001, the 100th class. So we were the centennial class. It was a big deal. And we actually graduated at the World Trade Center at the Marriott. It was just a normal day. Went downstairs, in our uniforms, went upstairs, got our assignments. My post was post 35, which was on the corner of 42nd and 8th Avenue between 42nd and 41st. So I had that whole front of the bus terminal. And what we call the rush in the mornings and the afternoons is in the rush in the morning, everybody's coming in from New Jersey, Connecticut, upstate New York, other parts of the city, coming in. It's thousands of people. Our jobs are to be positioned throughout both the buildings there to make sure everybody's safe, give any type of medical assistance, information. And it was just a normal day. I was actually looking toward the doorway where everybody comes out, had my back to 8th Avenue. And the city, as we all know, is very loud. So nothing unusual, just a normal day. And I happened to be looking over toward my right. I had an awning above me. And at the end of the awning, you could look up into the sky, and Sergeant Ross with two fellow officers, Pat McNerney and Eric Sanchez, were standing there. And I just happened to see Sergeant Ross kind of pointing at something coming over the air, and I couldn't see. And again, I didn't pay it much mind, but when I looked at the intersection of 42nd and 8th Avenue, and if you're haven't been to New York City, the intersection here is pretty large. I saw a shadow just come over. And it was kind of weird, but it's New York. Weird things happen. So I kind of went back to doing my job. Shortly after that, our radios crackled, and they said for everybody to 840, which is our code, for everybody come back to the police desk. So at that point, I crossed the street, 41st, onto post 5, where I met up with my fellow officer and who I graduated with, Dominic Pizzullo. Dominic, unlike me, was not someone that wanted to be a police officer. He was actually a high school teacher in the Bronx, but he came over for the benefits and the pay. But in those 9 months leading up to that, he understood what it meant to be a police officer, part of Thin Blue Line, and really making a difference in people's lives. As we went back, he just said, Will, something really bad must have happened. And I said, yeah, because for them to call us back. And as I came around the police desk, I could see our sergeants and lieutenants. And one of the sergeants I admired very, very much was Sergeant John McLaughlin. Being former military in the Navy, one of the things I learned in the Navy was always follow somebody into a bad situation that knows what they're doing, because your chances of coming out are much greater. And I had been to several gun calls. I knew he was a great leader, and I could see concern in his face. We went back into our what's called the reserve room, looked at the TV set, and there was Tower 1 on fire. One of the things that sets us, the Port Authority Police Department, apart from the NYPD and all our New Jersey counterparts is that, unfortunately, we're a target-rich environment. We were attacked in '93, and if you look at our facilities, the airports, the bridges, the tunnels, what do terrorists want to do? They want to kill as many people as they can, and our facilities are those targets. So right away, it's everything they told us in the academy was happening. I actually got on the payphone and got through to my wife to let her know I was okay, as I always did when there was an event going on. And I was on the phone with her, and that's when our Inspector Field, said, let's go. We're going down to the Trade Center, which was owned and operated at the time by the Port Authority, protected by the Port Authority Police. We had a command center there. And I remember just telling Allison I had to go. That'd be what later she told me, that's the first time you ever hung up the phone without saying I love you. But you have to understand our jobs as police officers, really our community, the people. And I didn't even think about that. We all got on the bus, about 20 of us. Sergeant McLaughlin led the way in a police Suburban, and we went down there. And again, everybody still didn't know what's going on, but 2 city blocks back is when the bus went silent. We seen a person 2 city blocks back, injured severely. We knew he had passed, and we went silent. Went up 1 more block. We're looking at Vesey Street now. We get off, and all I could see is Tower 1 on fire and the corner of 2 on fire. In my mind, I thought a plane hit, deflected, and caught 2. What we didn't know was on the route down, a second plane had hit. So we're standing there, we're gathering our stuff. It looked like a war zone. Vesey Street just destroyed. There was no people there, and that's when Sergeant McLaughlin, it's like out of a movie, like you see in the movies. He comes running through this war zone and just says, I need volunteers. Myself, Dominic Pizzullo, and another fellow officer who had 4 years on the NYPD and had come over to the Port Authority, Antonio Rodriguez, we volunteered. We went into the buildings and got our equipment on, our Scott Air Packs, out of an E-room, which are emergency rooms set out throughout the buildings. Before we went in there, Sergeant McLaughlin said, Jimeno, take our equipment, go up to the Church Street, our police Suburbans there, throw our equipment in there. When I ran up there, I threw the stuff in there, and that's when I realized I saw people running from Tower 2, again, not knowing 2 was in distress. And that's when I realized, hey, dummy, you better get close to the building. There's stuff falling. And everything's happening so quick that it's hard to really register everything. Start running back, get with the guys, put on our equipment. One of the things we promised each other, we wouldn't leave each other. We went up to the police desk, got more equipment. Sergeant McLaughlin said, get this mail canvas cart, get more equipment in there. So before you knew it, we looked like firefighters with guns on our side, which is what we do as Port Authority police officers. We're not only law enforcement, we're also firefighters, first responders as far as medical. So we ended up, at this point, leaving the police desk, going into the concourse area, and we were working our way toward Tower 1. And one of the things I tell everybody is people always ask me, what's the one thing you saw the most on September 11th, the darkest day in U.S. history? And I want everybody to understand this. The thing I saw the most was love. Something I wish I could really induce in today's society. People from all different backgrounds, colors, religions, political views, all helping each other. There was a single file of people coming out of Tower 1 just helping each other. I remember seeing a white gentleman with a black gentleman carrying a blonde woman who had a severe cut on her leg. She was bleeding. And they were all in a single line, helping each other. And I thought to myself, if us as police officers, we need to be better than these people because these people are really brave. But we went to Tower 2. And Sergeant McLaughlin said, before we got to the revolving doors that led into the lobby of 2, Jimeno, stay here with the cart. The rest of you guys come downstairs. And in that process, we met another officer, Christopher Amoroso. Christopher had been recently transferred from the bus terminal where he worked with us to the Trade Center. He had already saved 4 people that day and had been injured. But when he saw us, he hooked up with us. So the rest of those guys went downstairs. I stood there. And one of the things that I saw was just a lot of destruction, a lot of death inside the lobby of 2. I saw our cops and NYPD cops shooting out glass toward Liberty Street to let people get out. And one of the worst things I saw that day was actually not only concrete coming down Liberty Street, but actually human bodies coming down. And it was breaking my heart because every time someone was lost, I knew that someone's mother, brother, sister, the list goes on, just fellow human beings. I had a fellow officer come up to me, Bruce Reynolds, who had been helping people. We kind of interacted. He left. He would ultimately pay the ultimate price that day by giving his life. But then the rest of the team came up, and we started heading from Tower 2 back to where we thought was the distress point was Tower 1. Halfway up that hallway, which is a miracle, we happened to stop because Sergeant McLaughlin's radio went off. Inspector Fields was asking us where our location was. And Sergeant McLaughlin answered him, but he also had told a couple firefighters and EMT, which I remember, hey, be careful. I just came up from the B1 level. Elevator shafts are buckling. So as we all know, if your foundation is not strong, we're looking at trouble. And we happened to stop next to a doorway, which is a miracle, leading to a freight elevator. And Sergeant McLaughlin was talking to the inspector, and that's when we heard boom. I turned around and looked at the lobby of 2 where we just were coming from. And I just saw a fireball the size of my house. And one of the pivotal things that started my survival was when I had pushed the cart from the police desk to Tower 2. And on the way back, Antonio Rodriguez told me, let's switch spots. You're going to be exhausted if you pushing all the way where we're going. So we switched spots, and that ultimately played the first part of my survival. And the second part was Sergeant McLaughlin, as the building's coming down, he sees something I don't, because all I'm doing is holding on my helmet because it seems like an earthquake. Just a humongous ball of fire in Lobby 2, everything shaking. And remember what I said about follow somebody who knows what they're doing? In that split second, Sergeant McLaughlin sees the debris field coming toward us. Because as the building comes down, if you watch the news or watch the footage, debris is going in all 4 different directions. He actually sees what he thinks is a car bomb. He goes, what do they do in the Middle East? They blow something up, let the first responders come in, kill them again. So he says, run toward the freight elevator. Thank goodness that man knew the buildings like the back of his hand. In his mind, he thought, if I get my team around that freight elevator, the elevator shafts might deflect the explosion. That's pretty smart and pretty good education as far as being a boss. And so Dominic started running. I started running behind Dominic. I see Sergeant McLaughlin behind me. And as I hit that hallway, it was the first time I said to myself, Will, what did you get yourself into? Because at that point, I realized we're in trouble. And next thing you know, I get picked up. Something throws me on my back. As police officers, our first line of defense is our communication. I'm yelling on my radio, 813, which is our code for officer down. Everybody come, and I'm yelling, and something hits my hand. I lose my mic. I grab my helmet for dear life, and I had a chin strap on. Something hits me so hard, it ripped the helmet off me, and all I'm doing is holding on for dear life. You guys have all seen the footage of the towers coming down. All I can describe it as like a million freight trains coming down on you. And I say it's the roar of the devil. I mean, it was so loud, so devastating. And all I could do was hold on for dear life. And it happened for, it seemed like forever. And then everything went silent. And I found myself in a pitch black hole. After a little bit, light started coming in from above about 30 feet up. And I could see that I was buried. I literally had a wall, what I know today, a wall coming under my armpit here all the way down. My right leg was in a 90-degree angle, and Dominic was buried in a push-up position down next to me, and that's all I saw was concrete. After a little bit, I could hear Sergeant McLaughlin, who in the initial collapse is actually trapped in a fetal position, just trapped. And I realized that we had lost Antonio Rodriguez and Christopher Amoroso. At that point, Sergeant McLaughlin said, "What's everybody's condition?" I said, "I'm in a lot of pain. The shock was wearing off. I was being crushed. I literally felt like 80 Suburbans on my left side." Dominic said, "I think I could shimmy out of here." It took a little bit of time, but he was able to shimmy out. And a decision was made to try to get me out. And Dominic started trying to get me out. In that time period, unfortunately, the second tower came out, which we never knew. And unfortunately took Dominic's life in his last moments because a big piece of concrete came in and sat him down and just literally crushed him. He just said, "Willie, don't ever let anybody forget that I died trying to save you guys." I said, "Dom, I would never let anybody forget that." And he cracked the joke for the sergeant, said, "Sarge, can I get a 3-8, which is our code for, can I get a break?" And in his last moments, he wasn't thinking about himself, he was thinking about us. He pulled out his sidearm and he fired one round up at the hole as a last-ditch effort to let somebody know we were down there, and he passed. And at that point, it really started a very long process of our survival. I cannot describe to you in this time period how horrific it was. We had fireballs falling, Dominic's weapon fired off over my head, and then we continued to fight and fight and fight all night long till about 8 o'clock that night, where I heard United States Marine Corps, can anybody hear us? 2 Marine reservists and a civilian found us. One of the civilian went down what we call the pile and talked to a rescue worker, who then, in turn, communicated with ESU Truck 1, which Scott and Paddy and the cavalry came. And again, we can talk about what kept me going, but I want to just turn it over to them. But that's my story in a nutshell. It's more descriptive than that. It's longer than that. I don't think we have the time for that. But at that point, I knew that the cavalry's coming, and here's my cavalry right here.
Thank you, Will. We're just going to put up a couple of images in the absence of the greater detail you could add, just so that you can have some of this in your mind. The first photo is an overhead shot of the pile. This is photo 1. We also have a few images of some of your colleagues, which I want to put up before we go on to the next story, too. We just have a couple of shots of the pile coming. The pile that you're familiar with, you're about to tell us about. So this is an overhead shot of what these first responders were reckoning with.
And that's something they need to do, because I just want to let everybody know, being buried, I never saw what everybody else got to see. I was hospitalized for so long, so they are the ones that actually got to see this.
The next shot, photo 2.
That's the hole I was buried in. And just to clarify that, they had already stripped away some of the debris, because we were talking about this, because they had never seen this picture. A fellow officer of mine took a picture and recently talked to him, because you're still learning things about September 11th. Almost 25 years later, we're still learning. Scott and Paddy had asked about this, and I found out that was the hole. They actually brought Dominic out of there, but there was more debris on top. This is a little later, but that's the hole, and this is what these men were fighting through to get to me.
And then just a couple of images of the folks you've been talking about. Photo 4, which is Dominic Pizzullo.
That's Dominic, and let me tell you what a great individual he was. He was a father, a son, and let me tell you, just one great human being, great American.
And photo 5, Christopher Amoroso, Dominic, and Antonio Rodriguez.
Yeah, those are my buddies. That was our team, and I could have never asked. Growing up, I always wanted to be, I was watching war movies and police movies, and I always thought you want to be a hero, and you realize that you've got to be careful what you ask for. But I can say that I served with some of the best Americans, and you're looking at 3 of the best right there.
And one more photo, and then Scott will turn to you and Paddy. Photo number 6, Sergeant McLaughlin.
There's my sergeant. I always call him my hero because his quick thinking in the midst of a building falling down to get us to where we needed to, and then keeping me awake and me keeping him awake and working together that evening to survive, to get back home to our families. I love him to death. He's a very humble and quiet man. He lost most of his buttocks and is still suffering 9/11 challenges today, but you'll never hear him complain. He has to change bandages several times a day, almost 25 years later. And just a great man, a great American. I was blessed to have him as my leader.
This is a Joe McNally portrait among the ones that we have actually in the museum, along with other artifacts from these gentlemen and others. Scott, we're going to turn it over to you to pick up the story.
So September 11th for me started on September 10th. I worked midnights. I was watching my 2 boys during the day while my wife went to work. My 2 boys, Brian and Christopher, were 6 and 9 at the time. Didn't get much sleep, but I went into work at 11:30 on September 10th. Worked the midnight shift with Officer Kenny Winkler. Pretty uneventful. 8 o'clock rolls around in the morning. A day tour comes in, relieves us, and I head home to Long Island. Kenny Winkler decided to stay. He had something to do. He did a tour change, which is why he worked with me on the midnights, and he hung out at Truck 1 Quarters right on 21st Street. I get on the Long Island Railroad and I'm headed home, and I hear I'm dating myself, the Walkman, and I hear that they're talking about a plane that had struck the Trade Center. And it's like, well, it's a beautiful day. I'm not really sure how that happened, but maybe it was a small plane, and the pilot had a medical emergency and hit the tower. I couldn't visualize what they were talking about. I raced home, turned the TV on. It was the first day that both of my boys were going to be in school, so I could actually sleep a little bit. My wife was getting ready to go to work, and I turned the TV on, and I saw the large hole in the side of the Trade Center, one of the towers, and I yelled to my wife that the plane struck the Trade Center. She came and stood next to me watching the TV, and then we saw the second plane hit, and I knew immediately I had to get back to work, and we were under attack. Obviously, it was a planned attack. Raced back into Manhattan as fast as we possibly could. Other off-duty police officers from our unit were coming in, and we were getting our equipment together. Next to our building is a range, indoor range. It was then at the time it was a police academy next to our quarters on 21st Street, like I said. Range officers came up. We all knew we were under attack. We gave them some of our special weapons, machine guns, rifles, etc., because they had to defend the city. We didn't know what was happening next. We grabbed some rescue equipment and some firearms as well and tactical equipment, and we started the race down to the Trade Center. We got there just after the second tower collapsed. Paddy was, I don't want to steal your thunder, you were off duty at the time. You came in from home as well. The guys that relieved us were already down at the Trade Center with Kenny Winkler. Kenny Winkler jumped on the back of our big rescue truck and responded down to the scene as well. We searched all day long looking for survivors, and we couldn't find anybody. We found plenty of body parts, plenty of people who were dismembered. What we saw still haunts us to this day. We were searching so hard looking for survivors. We were crawling into any type of opening, any type of hole we could find. Going down the escalators, it was several stories deep down into the Trade Center. And couldn't find anybody. At times we had to crawl backwards up because we had crawled down on our stomachs and these escalators and twisted around I-beams and things just throughout the entire day looking for survivors. About 5:20 or so, Building 7 collapses, and we were pulled, the organized rescue effort was pulled off the pile. And I say organized because that included the firefighters, police officers, but there were so many civilians that were there trying to help. Will mentioned the 2 Marines that had found Will. They were not part of the organized rescue effort. They were on their own. So we were pulled off the pile. We were sitting in a building, I guess around the corner on Liberty Street, Paddy, and we were kind of bored, waiting. We were told to regroup before we could go back in onto the pile. And then we were searching some of the buildings on the south side of Liberty Street that were gouged out from the collapse of the buildings. And a firefighter had come over to us as we were coming out of one of these buildings and climbing on the piles. And he told us that there were 2 police officers trapped somewhere in the center of the pile, and he didn't know exactly where. And we just kind of pointed like over there. So I had thought that they were surface rescues. Somebody like us who came after the trade center, the buildings had collapsed, and because all day long our coworkers were slipping, falling, getting cut up, twisting an ankle, breaking a leg. I don't want to minimize that, but it was happening all day long. So we started racing over to the center of the pile, and police officer Greg Welch was in front of me. He slipped, sliced his leg up pretty good. He was bleeding pretty good, and I said, Greg, you okay? Yeah, just go get those guys and get out of there. So we started racing over, and a firefighter, tried to keep us from getting past him because buildings 4 and 5, 2 9-story office buildings, were burning all day long, and they were starting to collapse on top of the center where we're trying to get to. And we kind of blew him off a little bit. We were like, hey, running past him, jumping over from I-beam to I-beam, and through the rubble pile. We said, hey, we just got to get these 2 guys, and then we'll be out of there. There was a gentleman or somebody waving a flashlight, and that's what I focused on. When I got next to him, I don't know who he was. I couldn't tell you what he was wearing. We had a very brief conversation. I asked him what's going on. He says, I got 2 cops in this hole. So I dropped down into the hole. At the time was the size of a manhole. Paddy and I had our air packs on, as Will did, our gun belts, our rope rescue harnesses. We dropped down into this hole, and there was Sergeant Carnes. He was in this opening already. So he said, there's 2 cops buried in here. A former paramedic, Chuck Sirica, comes in, and Paddy comes in behind us. We were in a very, very small opening, and because Paddy and I had our equipment on, Chuck only had a sweatshirt on, said paramedic on it, and where he came from, who knows? He just materialized, and as did the Marines, and did a phenomenal job with us. He started crawling down about 20 feet on an angle through twisted I-beams and openings and pulling himself through, and he yells back that you can get to Will from the way he went down, but you can't do so with all your equipment on. So I took my air pack off, took my rope rescue harness off, and I know it wouldn't help me in this situation. But I also took my gun belt off, and when I took my gun belt off, that's when the first time I realized that I'm going to die in that hole. Cop never gives up his gun, but it wasn't going to help me. I couldn't take the chance of it getting caught up on anything because we had to crawl in to this hole. And as I'm climbing down through the opening that Chuck went in, getting around twisted I-beams and pulling myself through these tightest of spots, I said to myself, I asked my 2 boys to be good, take care of Mom, make me proud, and enjoy your life. I apologized for getting myself killed. Crawl down. I said that to myself. We crawled down to the hole, deeper into the hole. We came across Dominic Pizzulo, and we had to climb over Dominic about 10 feet, and then we had to come back another 20 feet or so to get to Will. And Will was he was in bad shape. He was on his back. Looked like he was poured out of a dump truck, completely encased in rubble. And in order to get to Will, we had to pull ourselves, Chuck and I had to pull ourselves one at a time into this opening that is no bigger than the chairs that you're sitting on. It was that tight. We had to pull ourselves in on the sides. We had to literally claw away at the rubble and push it down out of the hole towards where Paddy was next to Dominic Pizzulo. And the environment that we were in was so bad with the smoke and the dust that we were dry heaving in the hole. You can only work on Will for a few minutes, and then you had to kind of crawl back out feet first. And then Chuck would go in, and I would go in, and Chuck would come out, and I would go in, and I would come out, and Chuck would go in. We kind of tag-teamed Will a little bit, and Paddy was working next to Dominic Pizzulo, who was deceased by now, and working your way out, right? He was taking the rubble that we had, and he was pushing it down the elevator shaft. And you want to take it from there, and we'll go back to getting Will out.
So when Scott had jumped into the hole, we had a team of about 10 fellas, we'd come up the pile, and there was one photo that showed the structures built of beams, and they were very large at the bottom, and they got narrower as they got taller. I'm not an engineer, but I imagine it was for weight. And 2 or 3 beams were laid out perfectly to get us right to where they were. Through all that debris, I just remember seeing a good 100-foot length that we were able to not have to climb over everything to get up there. And the beam ended right where the hole was. And there was a young sergeant there, and you were already in the hole with Chuck and Jason Thomas, the other Marine. And I passed off my gun belt to the sergeant and jumped in. And like you said, down, across, back over. And it was a tight space. Never seeing John McLaughlin. Will kept saying my partner. We thought Dominic, and we didn't want to tell him that Dominic was deceased, so we didn't know for sure if he knew that. And we didn't want to get him any more traumatized than he was. And I remember the first fireman show, I think it was Asher. Mm-hmm. I said, give me a blanket so we could cover Dominic so nobody else has to see him. And we covered Dominic. And then we began dismantling the remnants of the 110-story building that had fallen on Will and John and that team. And luckily, that elevator shaft was not all that far away, so everything that you'd push back to me, we would throw down into the hole. I would throw down into the hole, and we were taking hits off the Scott air pack, and we would call for tools, and we would call for water. But now that group of us that started out as 10 turned into 200 people lining that pile, that beam down to the street. So water would be called for, and people would drink the water as it came up. So it never really got to us. And we drank out of a sodium fire extinguisher that was in the rubble. We turned it upside down, and we cleaned our mouths out with that. We would take air from the Scott air pack because it had gotten a little bit thick in there. And you're a volunteer fireman. There's a thing that could do a spray pattern or something that could draw the
Hydraulics, yeah.
It'll draw the smoke out, and that was great. But the hose would break, and then the hose would have to be repaired, and we'd be choking again. How you were able to stay calm through that, Will? I really.
Well, I just want to let everybody know that our human bodies are remarkable because. If you ever watch the movie World Trade Center, the parts that you see in there, and Scott will tell you, and Paddy, it's 100 times worse. Mm-hmm. But somehow, some way, both my sergeant and I, we were breathing in the smoke, and we were okay. I felt so bad because these guys, when they were there, you could cut the smoke with a knife, and they were choking the whole time, but they never stopped. And that's why I say these are incredible human beings, incredible brothers of mine in blue, but Americans. And of course, we're trying to do this in the time period, but what you see in that film, it doesn't even come close how bad it was down there and how horrific it was down there. But these guys kept going for 3 hours trying to get me out. It was very difficult. And just a funny part, everything that could go wrong went wrong. Because you're thinking, hey, we're in the United States of America, best equipment. Everything was broken. People were drinking water. And I'm just like, well, you got to be kidding me. This is like a nightmare, But they never gave up, and they got me home.
There were times when I was literally on top of Will, and I couldn't see him because of the choking smoke. And there was a point where I realized that he had an air pack still on his back, like the firefighters were. And I took a pair of paramedic shears that Chuck had, and I cut the pack off his back, and I yanked it out from underneath him. And then I passed that back out, and I thought we had him out. And then there was an opening. There was a cement slab on his chest that seemed to go on forever. And on top of that was just piles of rubble. And we took these extenders, what we used when we were trying to stop people from jumping off of bridges, part of our job as police officers as well in our unit, wrapped them around his chest. And Chuck came in, and we're trying to pull. Chuck and I are chest to chest in this tight opening. And we've got our arms above our heads. We're trying to pull Will out. And Will's a big guy. He was big then, too.
But sexy.
It's always sexy. And so that didn't work. And Will's saying that his leg is pinned. So Chuck backed out, and I crawled in on top of Will, and I crawled in over his chest in the smaller, and I was thinner then, too. And there was a little opening here. I crushed myself in that opening. And then I went down towards his knees, and there was a cinder block wall that was pinning his left leg down into the rubble pile, and I couldn't scrape away underneath it. So we were asking for equipment, and I asked for a air jacks, air hammer, like an air chisel, like the construction workers use on sidewalks, but they couldn't come up with one. They asked about airbags. There's not enough room for airbags. They said, what about a hearse tool, the Jaws of Life? I said, we're not going to get the pump down here for it. And they said, well, how about a battery-operated one? And I hadn't seen one before. I didn't know that one existed. So they found one of those. I don't know where they got it from, but Paddy passed it up to us. Corrections had it. And I had to jam it over, in that opening, over Will's chest, because I had to get it on the other side of him. And we're causing Will a lot of pain, and he's doing his best not to yell and scream in pain. And I kept apologizing to Will for hurting him more. And then we hear another voice in the hole. And all this time, Will's saying, you got to get to my partner. You got to get to my partner. And as Paddy mentioned, we didn't want to tell him, because we thought he was talking about Dominic, and we didn't want to tell him that Dominic was deceased. So we're like, well, the way the rubble fell, Will, we got to get you out, and then we'll get your partner out. And he's like, you got to get to my partner. You got to get to my partner. And cut my leg off. And because he knows now that his left leg is pinned, because I told everybody else what was going on. And I said, I got nothing to cut your leg off, with Will. And then Sergeant Carnes up above us passes down this Marine K-bar knife, and he says, here, use this. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And so Will's like, yeah, use that, cut my leg off. I'm like, Will, no, I'm not cutting your leg off. We're all of us, we're like, no, we're going to get you out here in one shot, in one piece. So I pushed this hearse tool onto the other side, and I'm leaning over Will. I get it in the right spot, and what I thought was the right spot, and I back out, and I tell Chuck and Paddy to get out. There's no sense of all of us getting killed or getting buried, because we had no idea what was going to happen if we moved that wall, that piece of cinder block off his leg. And Will says, stop talking and get me out. So I said, all right, Will, I said, I don't know what's going to happen here, Will. If it comes down on top of us, there's 1,000 people up above us that are going to start digging right away. And Paddy's like, we're not leaving you. We're staying with you till we get you out.
Now keep in mind, we were ordered out maybe a half a dozen times.
Yeah.
I'm ordering you out of the hole.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we're not leaving them here.
With colorful words. And that's, I think, one of the things that people have to understand. You have people who are sitting next to me they're family to me. They were brothers back then, but they were ordered to leave us. And Paddy, with some very colorful Irish words, said no. And I knew then, that's why I always say I have faith in this country, I have faith in this world, because of good people like that. But that was a very tough moment at that point.
And I will say, it was kind of just the way it fell out that you were the first one in. And out of those 10 guys, I ended up being the second guy. And the young sergeant had said, nobody else in there. And I said, well, who's in there? And he said, Scott. I go, who's with him? Oh, a Marine. I go, well, that's nice, but he's not a cop. So we always work as a team. There's no individualism. So I figured we'd go in, and like him, I have young children at the time. My son was a little over 2 and my daughter was 4.5. And I wished someone else was there to do it. I wish there was someone in front of me that could have got in, but it's what we had to do, and it's our job. It was our job, because if it wasn't us, who was it going to be? Not us individual. If it wasn't the emergency service unit, who was it going to be? So we went in to do our job, and I will say it, I didn't want to be in there. Any opportunity I could have got out of there, I would have, but we weren't leaving this man, and turns out to be John as well, to suffer anymore. And as Scott had said, John woke up, and now I couldn't see him. I was talking to him, but I could not see him. And I kept telling him, we will get to you as soon as we get Will out. Once we get Will out, we'll get to you, John. And he'd fade out of consciousness, and the paramedic would say he's gone. And 10 minutes later, he'd wake up again and start talking again. I called him Irish Eyes, because I'm Irish, he's Irish. I play the pipes, and Irish Eyes is a nice tune to hear on the pipes. So I said, we're going to get to you, Irish Eyes. We'll get you out of there. And John we thought we lost him a half a dozen times, and we didn't. Scott and I didn't get him out. The subsequent teams, it took till I believe 7:30 in the morning the next day to get John out through a coordinated effort. But it was a little bit of a difficult situation.
Yeah, it was tough going, and as Paddy mentioned, you had firefighters above us and rescuers above us outside the pile, and buildings 4 and 5 were starting to collapse on top of them and on top of us. They couldn't control the fires that we were in the pile, so they were yelling, "Guys, get out, get out. You got to get out of there. You got to get out of there." And then Will looks at me and he says, "You're not leaving me, are you?" And I said, "No, we're not leaving you." Did I want to go? You better believe I wanted to go. But like Paddy said, I wanted to get out of there too. But how do I leave? How do I go home and hug my boys? Mm-hmm. And Paddy hugged his kids, and we left him to die. It just wasn't happening. It had nothing to do with macho nonsense or anything. Selfishly, it's self-preservation. I don't think I could live with myself knowing I didn't give everything I had to try to get somebody else out. So as Paddy mentioned, John McLaughlin started to come around, and then we're like, "Who is that?" And Will's like, "That's my partner. Who do you think?" "That's my partner, who I've been talking about." We're like, "Well, we thought that's your partner." That's Dominic. He's dead. We're like, okay.
I was exhausted, so you can only imagine, dehydrated. So functioning was really something I had to key on. But once we got past that was the main thing, was him getting my foot out.
Yeah. So I put the jaws of life in the spot there, and then I said, "All right, I don't know what's going to happen here, but we'll get you out one way or the other." So we operated the tool. Wasn't enough. And the throw wasn't enough. It cracked a little bit, but didn't open it up enough to get Will's leg out. I backed out. Chuck goes back in on top of Will. He readjusts it, puts some pieces of debris in to take up the space. He backs out. He says, "Try that." I go back in. It worked. It pulled the cinder block wall off his leg. And then we start pulling him out again, and now his foot's stuck. And he's like, "Yeah, my foot. I told you to cut off my leg." I'm like, "All right, yeah." So I crawl back in on top of Will and down towards his feet. And we were joking around in that hole. I know it sounds bizarre, but the gallows humor, the cops humor. We had nothing to worry about. We didn't think we were going to live, so who cared, right? What we said down that hole. We could laugh about it now, and we laughed about it then. But there was my knees are by his head. Excuse me, my head's by his knees, and my knees were by his head as I crawled down on top of him. And I said, "Yeah, why can't you be a female cop?" And so he had a little chuckle there. And a piece of rebar was across Will's left foot. And I don't know where Paddy found it, but he found the perfect piece of rebar. It was the perfect length. It was bent in the perfect way. And he passed that over to us, to me, and I jammed it, and I'm laying on my stomach now, and I'm in this tiny opening, and I'm jamming it in this, right up against the rebar that was holding his foot down. And every time I lift the rebar up, I'd have to let go of the piece of rebar that I'm holding to try to pull his foot out, and I couldn't do it, both at the same time. So Chuck comes in, and he could only go so far in that hole, and I take his arm, and he's reaching in as far as he can, and I put his hand on Will's leg and his pants, and I said, "Will, Chuck, just grab it." And now I'm on top of Will still, right? I'm crushing him, and he's in a tremendous amount of pain. And I lift the rebar up, holding the rebar, and I said, yell at Chuck, pull, and he's yanking Will's leg out. Will is screaming. I'm on top of him. We're hurting him again, but Will took it like a trooper. He just wanted to get his partner out. He wanted us to cut his leg off. He wanted to do everything he could to get to John McLaughlin. John and Will were so badly injured, we didn't think either of them going to survive the rescue attempt. But Chuck got his leg out. We strapped him up on these extenders again. Chuck and I dragged Will back out to the area where Paddy was, which was probably no bigger than an opening underneath a normal kitchen table. That's where Paddy was with the
I'd say it was about as wide as that TV.
Yeah, it was our area of refuge when we couldn't work on Will anymore. Chuck or I, we'd crawl back out and we'd be with Paddy in this tiny little opening. And Paddy, you were working your way out, trying to dig a way out, and the guys were digging their way down because we couldn't get Will out the way we came down into that hole. And when we got Will out, passed him up, I crawled back into that hole and I talked to Sergeant McLaughlin and I said, John, and I had known John. We had trained with him through the unit. My partner in the police department, we grew up with him as teenagers and kids on Long Island, so there was a connection there. And I said, there's a fresh team coming down to try to get you out. I was physically shot. I've been up since the day before, and now this is 11:30, 12 o'clock at night on September 11th. And he just said, hey, thanks, Scott, appreciate it. And
very stoic.
Yeah, I honestly thought that he was going to give up. He got his team out, whoever was left, and he was going to give up and just pass away. Thankfully, a fresh team came in, and they got him out, as Paddy said, 7:30 or something.
So they very smartly, like we had thought we'd have him 15 more minutes, 15 more minutes, 15 minutes turned into 3 hours. Yeah. But at that point, we didn't want to commit any other resources because we had thought if it collapsed, it was going to collapse on us. Why change it? Why take a chance changing it out at this point? 15 more minutes. And no one came. There wasn't much room for people to come down in there. The three of us, and I remember Jason having to stand over in the corner or scrouch over in the corner, and then he finally got out. We had to make our own way to get out, and because we knew to push him back the 30 feet the other way, which would have been very difficult. And I remember, again, cops, gallows humor, joking around. We get him in the Stokes basket, and I said, how long are you on the job? And you said, 6, 8 months. I go, 6, 8 months? You're this freaking fat? You got to be kidding me. You're killing us. We got to lift you up now.
Jealousy is the highest form of flattery.
But we were able to, from them digging down and us dismantling pipes and wires and whatnot, we were able to make a hole closer to where we'd gotten him out to shove him up so he could be pulled out to the top side, because to send him back down the length of the stage to get to it would have been very difficult, and we did. And as we said, that turned into 3 hours and, figuring, okay, get a fresh team in here. And I remember once you had left, I said, John's over there. I can't see him, but start digging that way. And we headed on out.
It's a remarkable story. Scott, did you want to add something else there?
No, when I got out top of that pile, Kenny Winkler was there, and the rest of the guys from emergency service. And I said, Kenny, personal friend, John McLaughlin's in there. And he had known John McLaughlin too. We kind of laugh about it. He's like, yeah, okay, we'll get him out. And he's like, days later and weeks later, did you think, Scott, we weren't going to get him out because he wasn't your friend? But it's something you just say, right? When your kids leave the house, hey, be careful. It's just something that you say. But the patriotism that came after 9/11 on September 12th, September 13th, those days after was just absolutely tremendous. The streets were lined with people. They were applauding us. There were flags waving. We were joking on one of the nights headed back down to the Trade Center. We were there's 10 or 15 of us in this police van, and we're coming along Houston Street. We starting to go down the West Side Highway, and people are applauding us. And we're like, wow, we must be in a fire truck, because everybody loves a fireman, nobody loves a cop. And they're like, you're heroes and everything. So we're kind of, and we were punch drunk. We were just tired. We were working, 17 hours a day, if not more, completely exhausted. And so we were a little punchy, and we were kind of joking about things in that van, fireman. And then we get slowed down a little bit in this one area, and there's a kid, a young boy about my boy's age, 7, 8, in that realm, and he was holding a sign that said, "Please find my daddy." And I know we didn't find him alive. I don't know if we ever found him, but the joking stopped in the van. That just brought us back to reality as to what we were going down there to do, and to bring people home. It was tough work. Very, very difficult time.
I want to share a couple of images that, if you could bring up photo 7, and this is the aftermath. This is from the last column ceremony on May 30th. and you can see Sergeant McLaughlin and Will. The next one, photo 8, is on Medal of Honor ceremony here.
Oh, this is when I got promoted to detective.
When you got promoted, okay.
And as you can see, Sergeant McLaughlin, he always says I'm the weeble wobble man, because again, he lost pretty much his whole buttocks. And there I am with Paddy and Scotty. It was a good day. I got promoted. And we're with our families and our extended family that became family, Paddy and Scotty. So it was a good day.
Speaking of your family, photo 9, Will's family.
So my wife, who really, like I said, I wrote a book. It's really more in detail as to what you're hearing tonight. But we talk about our families. They wear the uniform too, our wives, our husbands. And my wife gave birth to Olivia on November 26, 2001, where I was able to be in a wheelchair to see the birth of my daughter. And that's my birthday. So that was my birthday gift. And I'm looking pretty good there. That's me. But you don't see my wounds because I'm wearing those big jogging pants. If you look at my leg, it looks like a shark destroyed it. I mean, but I still have my leg. I have a drop foot. I have to wear a brace. But I cannot express my gratitude to them, to the doctors. I flatlined twice that night. I died on the table twice. And here I am in late December with my family at home. So I guess the message I always talk about faith, hope, love, those 3 things. And whatever challenges you have in life, understand that if you can remember that this guy had 220 stories hit him with his sergeant, we survived, and I'm able to be home in December. I'm not walking yet at this point. I'm just sitting there holding my daughter. But you also can overcome and triumph over tragedy.
When Will's 2 daughters, Bianca and Olivia, were younger, Will would call us up and on a Sunday afternoon and say, "Hey, Scott, I got Olivia. She fell asleep on my chest. Thank you for bringing me home." And you can't put a price on that. You know, it made the risks all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Photo 10 is Scott with his sons.
There's my 2 boys, Brian and Christopher. Brian's the shorter one, and Christopher, first time in the history of the emergency service unit that 2 brothers went in together into that unit. There's been brothers and now there's fathers and sons, but there's the first time that both graduated together. Can't be more proud of them. A tough time to be a police officer, but great young men, and they're going to be great. They are great E-men.
And Paddy, do you want to talk about your intergenerational service story too?
So my son was 2 years old and 7 months, I believe, when the Trade Center happened, and left the house that day. Again, I was home, shot down there. Not shouting out to Honda, but I had a 1995 Honda Accord, and that thing could do 118 miles an hour before the transmission kicks out, and you have to go back to 118 miles an hour. But and I never thought he would go any route other than the education route, and we taught him to play baseball. So we thought we had the next Derek Jeter on our hands, and went on to college, played baseball in college, and he wanted to be a sports management major, and he wanted to basically be an agent. And when he realized you had to be a lawyer to be an agent, he decided, well, I'm not going to law school. So he took the Port Authority police test, and he scored well, and he was in the first group post-COVID, or during COVID, actually, the 120th class. And he graduated, and he wears Will's shield. So he wears Port Authority Police Shield 1117, and that's my son right there in the corner.
Patrick.
I'm very proud and honoring him.
And that's a big honor for me because
I love him dearly.
I have 2 girls, so I don't have any boys. And when I was contacted that he wanted to wear my shield, which, to be honest with you, I thought my shield was back in circulation, but no, they retired it. And they told me that, yeah, they'd bring it out of retirement. So I'm very proud. And I told him, for me personally, the shield, it meant a lot to me. But the shield for me means the world because we lost 37 cops that day, the most in law enforcement history, followed by 23 NYPD officers, our brothers and sister there, 343 firefighter, the countless civilians. But to have somebody who loves the job as much as I did to wear the shield and to carry on, not my legacy, but as much as the 37 and all those lost that day, it's true. And he's a great cop. So it's, like I said, we're a family. And people always ask this question, do you still get along with the people that saved you? I'm like, I love them. And we're very blessed to have a good group of people.
There's one more photograph I want to bring up, which is the letter from the school kid to Scott Strauss. It's on photo 13. This is from Alyssa, an elementary school student in Saratoga, California. She writes, in case you can't read it, Dear Scott Strauss, I'm writing this letter to you because I appreciate you for what happened on September 11th, 2001. I researched you up to know and learn more about you and how you were an amazing police officer. First, thank you for helping people evacuate from the Twin Towers. You searched through the rubble, saving as much people as you could find. Secondly, thank you for your bravery and courage you brought. I admire how you risked your life for other people. Last but not least, thank you for saving John McLaughlin and Officer Will Jimeno. Sincerely, Alyssa.
So it's incredibly inspiring and encouraging for me to hear that the younger generations are learning and researching about September 11th. But I can tell you that name could be interchanged with anybody's. We lost, Paddy and I lost 14 friends, co-workers from the emergency service unit that day. And I'm going to say only 14 because there were so many people that lost more, right? We had Cantor Fitzgerald lost hundreds. The fire department lost 343, but my name could be interchanged with Paddy's and Will's and anybody else that was down there that day. But it was just nice to get a letter like that from an elementary school child in California, not from here. So thank you, Alyssa.
And thank you all for joining us this evening. We're over time, but if there's a question or two, I think our panelists will indulge you. Does anybody have a question for our folks here? Right here in the front, William has a question. Third row there.
Thank you for your presentation, your stories. I'm a volunteer here at this wonderful museum. We emphasize the value of human life, and your actions certainly are inspiring. Along those lines, they bring hope. And we hope that love will displace the hate that brought us to that day. And I'd like to ask Will to talk a little bit more about the love. You mentioned it, and the love that you felt. I believe love was an important element in helping all of us get through it.
Well, it's true. And like I said, the one thing I saw the most of that day was love. And I think, like I said, it's something I wish I could inject into today's world because we're so polarized with the politics and this and that. But most people, I've always said this. I served in the military. I got to see 11 different countries. We are a ray of hope here in the United States. But one of the things we have common denominator with everyone in the world is people want to grow up, have a family, see their kids succeed, see their grandkids succeed. And it's the small groups that mess it up for the larger group. And I tell, especially children, when I speak to children, it's like, you can watch the news and it'll captivate you because it's all negative. If they were to show all the good things that happen in the world, nobody would tune in. I always say, why isn't there more of the good news, the person helping the elderly person across the street? Because there's more love in this world than bad things. And I guarantee you, they just won't make money on it. So I tell especially the children, the future generations, it's up to you to understand that loving someone is a tough thing, but it's a rewarding thing. And not to stereotype people. We have to deal with problems. There are, unfortunately, certain entities out there that are evil. But the one thing I've always said, and is the statement I always love by Edmund Burke is, all that is needed for the triumph of evil is good men to do nothing. Well, there's good men and women. And I tell the future generations coming up, this is your world. It's up to you to make sure you make a positive difference. And the way we stop racism, any type of negativity, rape, murder, is by you not doing these things and teaching other people to be better people. I have faith. I really have faith in not only America, but the world. And the one thing I know is that if we don't learn anything out of a tragedy, it's just a tragedy. And the memorial, for me, has become something that has inspired me. Like when I went to Pearl Harbor and I saw the USS Arizona as a young sailor, it inspired me. And what I love today is that people, especially young generations, come to this museum, to this memorial, and they see that the attack on September 11th was not only an attack on the United States of America, it was an attack on humanity. And we need to be better to each other. We need to be able to care for people, no matter what color, skin they are, what religion, what they believe in. While they're not believing in something that's hurtful to others, we need to support each other. And I truly believe that's something that will overcome these tough times. We're going through a different time here. I mean, again, worst attack since Pearl Harbor, one of the worst attacks in the world. But yet we are together. I love people. I get so many messages from kids around the world, especially from Middle East countries. And I tell them, I don't hate you. Do I hate the bad people? Yeah, I hate them because they're disrupting everything for us. So for your service here, thank you. And for anybody listening to this, understand there is more good in this world than bad. Don't get hooked on the news. Don't get hooked on the negativity. And we all do it. I can get caught up in it too and get mad about something. But I always remind myself, I can turn off the TV. I can go enjoy time with my family. I can go volunteer and do something positive. And understand there's more positive in this world and there's more love in this world than hate. We just have to seek it out. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's an agenda there to push that bad narrative. Don't fall for it.
Thank you. And one more question right here. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate your sharing this. And one of the things that struck me was how you knew the risk and went in and stayed there. I'm just wondering if you felt like you knew the risk afterwards, if you stayed around afterwards and other days. We hear so much about how terrible the air was. And, if you felt like at the time you had some understanding of what the risk was to be there too, as you continued to look.
My point of view, it was our job. We had to do it. Plain and simple. If we didn't do it, who was going to do it? Yeah, maybe the fire department, maybe some service member that was there. We were trained to do it. We had to do it. Going back the next day, I wasn't sure that Dominic was recovered. So I said, did anybody recover the deceased Port Authority officer? Back and forth, our job didn't communicate with Port, so they put a team together, get in there and get him. We didn't know that Dominic was pulled out that night. We went back with a team. I could not go back in the hole. I said, go in there, make a left, climb down, you'll find him. He's under a sheet. I couldn't go back. Days after, did we believe the government that they told us the air was clear? Well, no, we didn't. But what were we going to do? There's no way we could have wore Scott masks to do that 9-month-long, 20-hour a day, 23-hour a day rescue recovery effort. We have a supplied air system, which is a large cylinder tank, 150 foot of hose and a mask. You couldn't wear that because you would rip the hoses on the road. You had to do your job. That's it. The respirators they gave us were the wrong type. We had painter's masks that day. I mean, it's just, you had to do your, what am I going to, I can't go in, coach, the helmet don't fit right. You have to do your job. Whether or not it deals with us later down the road. This week, 2 retired emergency men died. Last week, another one died. People are dying left and right. Cancers, they're presumed to be from down here. Who knows? But you do your job. That's it. Or you don't do your job and you live with the consequences. So we did our job.
One last thing, if I could, is I just want to thank the military. We couldn't take the fight to them, so the military did. We were down here. We were defending the city as best we could. We didn't know if another plane was going to come in. We heard fighter jets screaming overhead while we were doing digging during the day. We didn't know if they were ours. Folks had the benefit of watching the TV or listening to the newscasters say, "Oh, there's military is in the air," but we didn't know if there were dogfights in the air. We had no idea what was going on. But I got to say that thanks to the military for, I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but for getting that pound of flesh for us, for our coworkers, and all for the innocent people that were murdered that day. So thank you guys, appreciate that.
And Beth, I just want to thank you and everybody at the memorial, everybody sitting here, everybody who's listening, and I just want to You know, we're blessed. I don't know how many more days I have. You know, both of them have gone through their sicknesses. I guess, I don't know why I'm the knucklehead that still has great lungs and I do a lot of outdoor activity, and I get around with a bum leg. But I want everybody that's listening to this today to understand that please come down, support the memorial, and teach your children about what happened that day so they understand to make a better world. And that's what I love about the memorial. People come through here and they contact me from throughout the world, and it changes their lives. They understand the impact that September 11th had. For me, of course, it was personal. For our department, it was very personal, losing 37, many of them my friends, instructors. But I just want everybody to understand how important this memorial is and how important all the lessons are. Again, we're a small slice of that day. You know, we're blessed that, you know, they selected us to make a film about it, which I hope future generations look at. And then if you watch that film, we're not showing you about the what I call the cowards, the terrorists. We're showing you about the good of the day, how people put their lives on the line to come and get us out, how people, the communities came together. And that's what we have to remember. No matter through whatever tragedy, there's always going to be good people. And I'm blessed to have such a great relationship with Beth and everybody here at the memorial. They truly are heroes. You guys are heroes because you're teaching future generations about an event that didn't only affect the United States, but the world. So thank you.
Please join me in thanking Will Jimeno, Scott Strauss, and Paddy McGee.